Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're joining me for today's explainer because we're going to dive into some truly mind-bending material. We're usually taught to look at history as this neat, perfectly logical timeline. It's often presented to us as a straightforward series of carefully connected events, right? Driven by powerful leaders making strategic choices, massive wars, groundbreaking inventions, basically a clear sequence of cause and effect. But what happens when that logical sequence just completely breaks down? Well, today we're unpacking the staggering reality of bizarre, unexplainable coincidences. We're going to explore those rare moments where reality produces overlaps so strange and so highly specific that they seem almost impossible to accept as mere chance.
So that brings us to a really fun question. Is history just pure cause and effect, or is it somehow scripted? It's a mystery that totally fascinates historians, and honestly, just everyday people alike. As we jump in today, you're going to see a real escalation of improbability. Whether these moments are purely the result of random mathematical chance, or examples of history's uncanny ability to repeat itself, they heavily challenge everything we think we know about everyday logic.
Okay, let's dive right into this with one of the most famous examples in American history. Have you ever really looked at President Abraham Lincoln and President John F. Kennedy? The parallels between their lives and their tragic deaths are just absolutely eerie. Lincoln was elected in 1860. Kennedy was elected exactly 100 years later in 1960. Both of these men were assassinated on a Friday. Both were tragically shot in the head while sitting right next to their wives. And if that wasn't enough for you, both presidents were succeeded by vice presidents with the last name Johnson. These incredible parallels spanning an entire century have easily made this one of history's most heavily discussed coincidences.
And the wild thing is, these historical overlaps aren't just limited to American presidents. They happen in massive, world-altering military campaigns too. Take Napoleon. He invades Russia in the summer of 1812, only to watch his entire army get completely wiped out by the brutal Russian winter. Exactly 129 years later, Adolf Hitler launches a remarkably similar invasion into Russia in the summer of 1941. The result? A nearly identical disaster. Both leaders charged in during the summer and watched their campaigns completely collapse as that freezing winter hit. It's an exact seasonal and strategic repetition that has military historians scratching their heads to this day.
Now, sometimes the details of these coincidences get incredibly specific. Take the letters and numbers AIII-118. That was the actual license plate number on the car Archduke Franz Ferdinand was riding in during his 1914 assassination. The very event that literally sparked World War I. So why does that matter? Well, that plate, AIII-118, eerily resembles the exact date of the armistice that ended that same war, November 11, 1918. 11-11-18. Whether it's deeply meaningful or just a random string of characters, you have to admit that numerical connection is completely fascinating.
So, we've looked at history repeating itself, right? But what happens when fiction predicts reality? I mean, it's one thing for political or military events to echo each other, but it's a whole different ballgame when prophetic pages in a book or moments in pop culture seem to get the future strangely, perfectly right, long before it even happens. Picture this. In 1898, an author named Morgan Robertson publishes a novel called Futility. The book features a supposedly unsinkable ship named Titan that strikes an iceberg and sinks in the North Atlantic. Keep in mind, that was pure fiction. 14 years later, in 1912, the real-world Titanic suffered an eerily similar fate. A supposedly unsinkable ship with almost the exact same name hitting an iceberg in the exact same ocean. The similarities between Robertson's fictional story and the real-world tragedy remain one of history's most famous and startling coincidences.
Let's slow down for a second, because this next literary coincidence is honestly deeply unsettling. In one of Edgar Allan Poe's novels, a shipwrecked crew becomes so desperate they resort to cannibalism, and they end up killing a sailor whose name is Richard Parker. It's a horrifying but entirely fictional tale. Fast forward a few decades and a real shipwreck unfolds in almost the exact same way. The desperate real-life crew actually resorted to cannibalism, and the name of the poor victim? Richard Parker. The similarity is just so incredibly precise, down to the exact first and last name, that a lot of people still find it super hard to believe it wasn't somehow planned. And of course, modern pop culture has produced some really weird predictions too. I'm sure you've heard about how the animated series The Simpsons famously depicted the massive corporate buyout of Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox decades before it actually occurred in the real world. Now, obviously, the writers likely never intended to genuinely predict the future, but this massive coincidence has absolutely cemented the show's reputation for making these uncanny forecasts.
We've seen military leaders, ships, and corporate buyouts, but let's shift our focus just a bit. Could the cosmos have a sense of personal timing? We're going to explore some highly personal, incredibly bizarre timelines involving individuals. These are the kinds of stories that challenge absolutely everything we think we know about mathematical probability.
Let's look at this tragic father-son connection at the Hoover Dam. Back in 1922, George Tierney died during the dam's early survey work. He was literally the very first worker to lose his life there. 14 years later, in 1936, his son Patrick became the final worker to die during the dam's construction. But the detail that makes this truly staggering is the date. Both the first death, the father, and the final death, the son, occurred remarkably on the exact same calendar day, December 20th. Talk about a chilling loop across time.
Now, what's really interesting about this next one is how incredibly poetic the timing is. The legendary author Mark Twain was born in 1835, which happened to be the exact year Halley's Comet appeared in the sky. During his life, Twain actually predicted out loud that he would die when the comet returned. And amazingly, his life synced perfectly with the cosmos. He passed away in 1910, just one single day after Halley's Comet made its closest approach to Earth. He came in with the comet, and just as he predicted, he went out with it.
But the bizarre personal timelines don't stop there. Take Italy's King Umberto I. He happened to meet a restaurant owner who looked exactly like him. But it went way beyond just physical appearance. They got to talking and discovered they shared astonishingly similar personal details, including the exact same birthdays and incredibly similar family information. And the ending to their parallel story? It's even stranger. Both of these identical men died on the very same day. The restaurant owner died in an accident, and the king was assassinated.
If you thought that was unbelievable, consider the famous Grimm twins. These identical twins were separated shortly after birth, so they grew up having absolutely zero knowledge of each other. They didn't even reunite until they were 39 years old. And when they finally did, the similarities were just staggering. Both of their adoptive families had independently named them James. Both men had grown up and married women named Linda. Both had given their sons nearly identical names, and both of them ended up working in law enforcement. To live such incredibly parallel lives completely independent of one another is just wild, and it remains one of the most astonishing examples of coincidence ever recorded. History is literally packed with these. Let's do a quick rapid-fire round. First, Wilmer McLean. The American Civil War literally began and effectively ended around his personal property. Next, a British soldier tragically died in battle. Actually, wait, it's even crazier. He died right beside a tree that had been planted by his own father years earlier. Third, a woman who was randomly injured by a bullet ended up marrying the exact emergency room doctor who treated her for that specific injury. And finally, legendary actor Anthony Hopkins was searching for a rare book for a film role, accidentally found a copy left on a park bench, and later discovered it was the author's own lost personal copy. The sheer volume of these oddities is just overwhelming when you look at them all together.
Which really brings us back to the core lesson of our explainer today. History is not always a straightforward sequence of cause and effect. Look, logically, science and mathematics tell us that in a world filled with billions of people and countless millions of daily events, coincidences are completely inevitable. The math dictates that strange overlaps are going to happen. Yet when we look at the extreme specificity of the examples we've covered today, they still completely challenge our sense of probability. They remind us that hidden within the vast, sprawling timeline of human history are moments so strange and so eerie that they still amaze us centuries later.
So I want to leave you with a provocative question to think about. Are these just mathematical probabilities, or is reality sometimes stranger than fiction? Are we really just looking at the inevitable result of billions of moving pieces, or do these events align in ways so improbable that the universe almost feels scripted by a novelist? It's this wild tension between pure chance and destiny that makes studying our past so endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking for those hidden connections, and I'll catch you next time.